Hi, it's Jess. I'm here today with my first relationship reality. I'm doing a series, and basically, it's real questions from real people. I get asked questions all the time, and I thought that it would be really helpful to be able to answer some of these questions here, knowing that these are questions that we all have. We're all in our relationships doing our thing. And there's a lot of things that aren't really talked about. And at the same time, there's a lot of things that we actually don't know about. There's kind of like some deeper sorts of inner workings that are happening that we can't really see when we're looking at the surface of our relationships. And so I wanted to start today. I'm actually answering a question that a woman asked, and I'm choosing this one for the first one today because it's a common question that I hear all the time from both men and women. And her question is, Jess, how do I get my husband to really hear me? And this kind of almost sounds like kind of like a vague or general sort of question, but it's a really important one. Too often we find in our relationships where we're not being heard. And it comes up all the time. I'm not feeling heard. I'm not feeling understood. And in our day-to-day relationships, it can have a lot to do with just those mundane things like something having to do with the garbage, where we're putting the garbage can, taking the shoes from the front entrance and putting them away. So kind of like almost certain agreements that we come up with within the relationship. And it feels like we have an agreement. It could be about finances, how we're going to manage that, and decisions or choices that we're going to make with that. Hi, Lynn. And also feel free to wave too or say anything as well. It's great to see you. And I'll even see if I can weave in some answers to some of your questions too during today. And so, yeah, just some really everyday stuff when we're wondering about how heard or do we really feel. And more often than not, when we're not feeling heard and agreements that we have come up that aren't followed through with, then we have conflict, and then we have issues between the two of us kind of trying to understand, well, what happened? I thought that we were on the same page. And that's a big one. It's like we feel like we're on the same page and we're working together. And then the next thing we know, something happens. Something happens different than what we agreed to. And so when it comes to looking at the reality of things, I'm going to point out 2 points of reality. The first one that you want to really look at is buy-in. And this is a really important piece. You want to get a sense of what your, in this case for this woman here, what your husband's buy-in really is to the agreement that we've come up with. And buy-in is really connected to us knowing just how important this is, why this actually really matters. And more often than not, we don't actually really say why something matters. We almost kind of imagine that someone's just going to really know automatically. And so, and I guess something that I really want to point out too is why this matters to you, and at the same time, why this matters to the relationship. And again, more often than not, the garbage can not being put where we agree to place it, or taking the shoes from the front entrance every day to kind of keep things tidy. That's not actually really what this is about. More often than not, it boils down to intimacy. It's this idea that we're working together, that we're on the same page together on something, and importantly, we're feeling connected. We're in some sort of flow. And so when something that we agree to, or I voice what I really want, and then it's not happening, then I wonder, why am I not feeling heard? Why am I not being heard? And so important to be able to talk about why this actually matters. And so he's not really going to buy into this if he doesn't really know why. For most of us, we kind of look and we all have our things, right? And we look at what the other person really thinks is important. We don't really have a clue why that's important. And so we're more easy to skip over it and not really follow through with anything on that. And so you're going to want to get a sense of why this actually really matters. The second thing and point of reality is, actually I have it written down right here, is do you know what he actually wants? And you might be saying to yourself, Jess, is this actually saying that it's about me, that I'm not actually really listening to what he wants and that's why I'm not feeling heard? I would say in some ways, yes. And I'll tell you why. Too often we come up with these agreements. We come up with these ideas of what we're going to be doing within our relationship and in our day-to-day life. And of course, we're going to want our way. We're going to want to have it the way that we need it, or that feels right for us. And so it's really easy for us to want to almost get the other person to agree to this. And then when that happens and we feel good, it's like, right on. Now I'm going to get my way. Everything feels really awesome. We're on the same page together. And one of the telltale signs that this is not actually the case, and this is actually not what he really wants, is in the behaviors, is in that he's not doing it. It's like, what? We agreed to this. And you really have to pay attention to this. This happens all the time because we're going to want to avoid conflict. He's not going to want the conflict. So if we're going to talk about what we're going to do, I'm going to agree to it. He's going to agree to it. And it might not actually be what's true for him. It might not be what he agrees with. So a really important piece of this, when you're seeing this happen, it can feel confusing, but it's actually really not confusing at all. It's right there in front of you. If you agree to something, the person doesn't do it. It's obvious that they actually didn't want to. That they didn't want to, and then going back to that first point, they don't understand why this actually really matters. They're not actually really seeing why this matters for you specifically, but also for the relationship, which involves him. And so the more that he can get that, then he might even, here on the second point, agree. He might actually, it might come from a place of his truth. He might go, you know what? Yeah, this is actually something that I want. And so really just to kind of back up and summarize this, and something just to take away, the two things that you're really going to want to do, and you're going to start with communication, like how are we actually talking about this? And so the two things is going to be looking at and explaining and expressing why this is important to you, right? Why does this matter to you? And being able to have that real sort of conversation. And it might seem almost a little bit crazy because we're just talking about the garbage bin or the shoes. But in the beginning especially, those are the things that you want to tie back to the deeper roots of why this actually matters. And then the second point is really getting a sense of what he actually really does want, why this actually really does matter, or what really actually does matter to him. And if this does matter to him in a particular way after we've talked about what's important about it. And so just taking some time to be able to explain and express those 2 points together. And it will really make such a big difference on this experience of feeling heard. You know, we can almost say in some ways we're not feeling heard because these first steps really aren't addressed, because they're not addressed, and we're actually really not tuning into what is really about us, right? We're not saying what we really need to say. We're not saying what really matters to us. So then how can someone hear it? And how can someone else respond to it? Hi, Jean-Luc. And so I'm just wrapping up today and just addressing this woman's question here about how do I get my husband to really hear me? And I know that this is such a struggle for a lot of us. Relationships are really difficult, and getting to be able to express what's really true for each of us and expressing it, like that's a really big part of it. And it does boil down to being able to communicate that and communicate it in a particular way. And it comes down to how do we communicate? And so that's it for today. I hope that you enjoy your weekend and take some of these pieces here with you. We know usually in the weekend, that's when we're doing our everyday stuff, and we're maybe doing stuff around the house or different sorts of activities. And this can be a time for you to pay attention, right? To kind of tune in and notice maybe some of these areas that we have some agreements that aren't necessarily fully agreed on. You know, we can't have that kind of agreement unless we have all the parts of the contract, basically, all the details in it. So for us to really have a full agreement. So have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'll see you next week too. I'm going to be responding to a different question next week, and that one should be something more around finances and conflict over finances. This is such a big issue and problem within relationships. It's we can talk about a lot of things, but then when it comes to money and finances, that can be extremely challenging. So stay tuned. I'm going to put up some more information of that coming.